Every day you make an assumption that your phone calls, your messages, the things you type when you think no one is looking are yours. That when you lower your voice or close a door, the government cannot simply listen in. That assumption has a name in American law, a reasonable expectation of privacy, and it has a surprising origin. Not a mansion, not a private study, a glass phone booth on a Los Angeles street, an FBI microphone taped to the roof, and a small-time gambler who had no idea he was about to redraw the line between the citizen and the state. This is the story of Katz versus United States, the 1967 case that decided privacy follows the person, not the place, and quietly became the foundation for how the law treats your phone, your email, and your data today. One note before we begin. This is legal history and education, not legal advice. In the mid-1960s, a man named Charles Katz had a routine. From a row of public telephone booths on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, he placed and passed along bets, transmitting illegal gambling information to other states. To Katz, a public phone booth was the safe choice. Step inside, pull the door shut, drop in your coins, and your conversation was just between you and the person on the other end of the line. Or so he assumed. The FBI had been watching him. Agents suspected what he was doing, and they wanted his words. So they did something simple, and in their eyes at the time, perfectly legal. They taped an electronic listening and recording device to the outside of the phone booth. They never picked a lock, never stepped inside, never laid a hand on him. They simply recorded his half of the conversations from the other side of the glass, and they did it without a warrant. Those recordings became the case against him. At trial, the government played Katz's own words, captured from the booth, and he was convicted of illegally transmitting wagering information. Katz appealed, arguing the recordings should never have been allowed, that the FBI had searched him without a warrant. The government's reply went straight to the heart of how privacy law worked at the time. To see the clash, we need the Fourth Amendment. It protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Powerful word, but notice what they describe. Persons, houses, papers, things. Physical places and physical objects. A public phone booth on a city street was none of those. The agents had not entered a house. They had not seized any papers. In fact, the Supreme Court had already drawn that line decades earlier in a 1928 case called Olmstead. There, the court had ruled that wiretapping was not a search at all because the agents had not physically trespassed onto the suspect's property. Privacy, under Olmstead, was tied to property. No physical intrusion meant no search, and no search meant no Fourth Amendment. By that logic, a microphone on the outside of a booth was perfectly fine. But by 1967, that logic was cracking. Technology had outrun it. The whole point of an electronic bug is that it does not require breaking down a door. The government could now listen to almost anyone from a distance, touching nothing at all. If privacy only meant stop them from physically trespassing, then privacy was quietly disappearing, invisibly, one microphone at a time. So the question reached the Supreme Court, and both sides argued about the booth itself. Was a glass phone booth a constitutionally protected area? Katz said yes. It was private enough to count. The government said no. It was a public booth made of glass that anyone walking past could see straight into. They were fighting over the place. This is where Justice Potter Stewart, writing for the court, did something unexpected. He said both sides were asking the wrong question. The case, he wrote, could not be decided by arguing about whether a phone booth was a protected area. That entire way of thinking, privacy as a matter of physical places, was itself the mistake. Then came the line that changed everything. The Fourth Amendment, Stewart wrote, protects people, not places. What a person knowingly exposes to the public, he explained, is not protected, even inside his own home. But what he seeks to keep private, even somewhere a stranger could see him, may still be constitutionally protected. Privacy was no longer about walls. It was about the person, and under that idea, Katz won. When he stepped into the booth and shut the door behind him, Stewart reasoned, he was entitled to assume that the words he spoke into the phone would not be broadcast to the world. He was not trying to hide from the eyes of people walking by. Of course they could see him. He was trying to keep his conversation private. The government had invaded that, and to do it lawfully, they would have needed a warrant. And notice what the court was willing to do. Charles Katz was no sympathetic hero. By the government's own evidence, he was guilty, running an illegal gambling operation across state lines. The justices knew it, and they threw out the recordings anyway and let his conviction fall. Not because they doubted what he had done, but because the question in front of them was so much bigger than one gambler. If the government could secretly record anyone, anywhere, without a warrant, then the principle at stake belonged to everyone, and it was worth more than a single conviction. In a single stroke, the old rule fell. The court declared that the trespass doctrine of Olmstead could no longer be regarded as controlling. A search no longer required a physical intrusion. The government did not have to break in to search you. Listening could be a search, and listening without a warrant could be unconstitutional. But the most influential words in the case were not even in the main opinion. They were in a short concurrence by Justice John Marshall Harlan, and they gave the new principle a usable shape. Harlan proposed a two-part test for when privacy is protected. First, did the person actually expect privacy? And second, the crucial part, is that an expectation society is prepared to accept as reasonable? That became known as the reasonable expectation of privacy test, or simply the Katz test. To this day, it is one of the most cited ideas in all of American constitutional law. Whether the government has searched you now turns on a question about expectations, yours and society's, not on whether anyone crossed a property line. Not everyone agreed. Justice Hugo Black dissented, alone. The Fourth Amendment, he insisted, was written about tangible things: persons, houses, papers, effects. Eavesdropping on a conversation, he argued, simply was not a search or a seizure in any honest reading of those words. The court, he warned, was no longer interpreting the Constitution. It was rewriting it to fit the times. That tension never fully went away. But Katz won the future. Because here is why a 1967 case about a phone booth matters more now than ever. The reasonable expectation of privacy test is how courts decide whether the government needs a warrant for your cell phone, your emails, your location history, the files you keep in the cloud. Almost every modern fight over digital surveillance is, at its core, an argument about Katz. And think about what that means for the device in your pocket. The smartphone you carry holds more of your private life than any phone booth ever could. Your messages, your photos, your location every minute of every day. The searches you would never say out loud. When courts have to decide whether the government can reach into all of that without a warrant, they reach back to a glass booth in 1967. In a real sense, your phone is the new phone booth. And Katz is a large part of the reason the law treats what is inside it as private at all. And it is still unsettled because the test contains a moving part. What society treats as a reasonable expectation of privacy shifts as technology shifts. Do you reasonably expect privacy in the record of everywhere your phone has been? In what you type into a search bar? Courts are still answering those questions decades later using the framework that a gambler in a phone booth set in motion. That is the quiet power of this case. Katz took a constitution written for a world of houses and papers and made it about something more human. The expectation, wherever you are, that some part of your life remains your own. It moved privacy off the map of physical property and onto the person, which is exactly where the digital age would come to need it. So the next time you assume that a message, a call, or a search is private, remember where that assumption became law. Not in a palace, but in a glass booth on a Los Angeles street in 1967. With Miranda, with Gideon, and now with Katz, you can see the same quiet project, a country deciding, one case at a time, what the Constitution truly protects. If that is the kind of thing you want to understand more deeply, consider subscribing. We take one landmark case at a time, and we try to get it right. Thank you for watching. And remember, this video is for education and history. It is not legal advice.